that same time, Brenton Butler was at his home, saying good morning, taking care of his dog. But those two events collided about 2.5 hours later. He was arrested by the police and taken to be viewed by Mr. Stevens. And Mr. Stevens identified him as the man who shot his wife. This entire case, everything took place in 2 hours between 7 and 9. And what the jury ultimately comes to believe about those 2 hours is going to determine whether Brent goes to prison for life or is returned to his family.
You going with him?
On the morning of May the 8th, I first read about the Brenton Butler case in the paper. The article said that a 15-year-old black kid had shot and murdered a white tourist, and that he had confessed. And if true, that appeared to be the end of the story. My immediate reaction was he had thrown his own life away, as well as that of the tourist. I had a chance later that morning to meet Brenton Butler for the first time. What he told me about the case made sense. What he told me about how the detectives had treated him made me angry. And as I learned more, I became increasingly angry.
Suspect's going to be a skinny black male wearing dark shorts, unknown shirt, had on a hat. Last seen on foot, running southbound, possibly using like a small Derringer-type pistol.
The latest update is a black male with a fish-like hat on with a cloth build.
Okay, Officer Martin, I've asked you here today because you've been listed by the state as a potential witness in a case that's pending against Brenton Butler. Specifically, Mr. Butler is being charged with responsibility for the death of Mary Ann Stevens on or about May 7th of 2000. I'm Ann Fennell. I'm an attorney with the Public Defender's Office in Jacksonville, Florida, and I've worked here for almost 23 years.
The canine officer, we're talking about how little we had, just a black male in the area. And I was actually facing north and he was facing south. And he said, well, you know, there's a young black male right there. It could be him, could be anybody. I said, well, okay. I'll go talk to him. You know, being that we didn't have much to go on, I said, well, I'll go around there and talk to him. So I pulled out and drove over to him. I told him that we had a murder up the street, that the police were looking for anybody that may be able to help us solve it, or anybody that could have seen anything. I asked him if he lived in the area. He said, yes, he lived nearby. And I said, well, would you mind coming up here and talking to the detectives for a minute and tell them if you see anything? He goes, no, not at all.
When you get to the hotel, where do you park?
Parked almost in that ditch, right, somewhere along in here. I was half hanging in and out of the road. I remember having to jump across that ditch.
Okay, so then what happens?
They went and talked amongst themselves for a minute or two and went and got the victim's husband, and he indicated that Brenton Butler was the person who shot his wife.
So he's about 50 feet away and he says, that's the guy.
Right. And we were all, well, kind of taken back, so we had him come over even closer, almost to the car at that time, and he looked again and he said, yep, that's the guy.
Officer Martin came in and candidly admitted that the only reason Brenton Butler was even stopped that morning was because he happened to be a black male walking in the neighborhood. Now think about that. That means for every African American in Jacksonville, Florida, if they happen to be walking down the street, lawfully going about their own business, not doing anything wrong, that they are subject to being stopped and asked to get in a police car and driven away from what they're doing and subject to being shown to the victim of a crime with the possibility that that victim would identify them under the most suggestive of circumstances, that being that they happen to be sitting in the backseat of a police car, and most victims would think that they wouldn't be sitting in the backseat of a police car unless they'd done something wrong, right? So that's where we are today in Jacksonville, Florida. And I personally find that to be disgusting and reprehensible.
We're going to go through courtroom 7.
Okay, the case set for today is the state of Florida versus Brenton Leonard Butler. Is the state now ready to proceed with its opening statement? Okay, then Ms. Dare, you may proceed.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. May it please the court.
Certainly.
On May 7th of this year, the defendant, Brenton Butler, approached Mary Ann and James Stevens at the Ramada Inn, and he demanded Mrs. Stevens' purse. Before she had a chance to comply, he raised a gun to her face and fired, hitting Mrs. Stevens at the bridge of her nose, killing her. The evidence that you will hear that proves the defendant is the one who committed this crime really comes down to two things. First, Mr. Stevens, the only eyewitness to the actual shooting, positively identified the defendant as the person who did this to his wife. And he will come here in court and he will positively identify the defendant in court. The second piece of evidence is that the defendant gave a statement to the police on the afternoon of the shooting, admitting to the shooting.
That's great. May it please the court, counsel for the state. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The evidence in this case will show you that Brenton Butler did not commit this homicide and, in fact, could not have killed Mrs. Stevens the morning of May 7th. At 12 noon, you will hear that Detective Williams and Darnell began their questioning of Brenton Butler. They asked Brenton Butler where he was Saturday night and Sunday morning. On Sunday morning, I woke up, I took a shower, I brushed my teeth, I saw my mom and my little brother. I took care of my dog, and a little after 9, I left to go to Blockbuster to fill out a job application. And the detectives told him, "You're lying. We've got an eyewitness." Detective Glover arrived at the homicide office before 6 p.m., and he will tell you that he was told that Brenton Butler was ready to confess. Ready to confess. Here is a boy who has said absolutely nothing but, "It's not me, I didn't do this." And at 5:56, you'll learn that Detective Glover entered the interview room alone to talk to Brenton Butler. And Detective Glover said, "You're not innocent. You're not innocent. We've got an eyewitness. It's niggers like you that make me mad these days." And Detective Glover said, "You know, if I had done this, I'd have thrown that purse and gun in the woods. Isn't that what you did? Didn't you throw that gun and that purse in the woods?" And Detective Glover takes Brenton Butler alone, hanging on to Brenton Butler's belly belt as Brenton is handcuffed into the woods, deep into the woods, and in the middle of the woods, in that semi-darkness right before it gets totally dark, ladies and gentlemen, Detective Glover hit him in the stomach, not once, but twice, and hit him in his face.
Could you state your name, please?
James Marion Stevens.
Now, the Stevens were in 142. That's on this side, right here. Okay, so 142. Now, this is where they turned. It's about 7:30 in the morning. They've got muffins, coffee, paper. They're talking to each other as they walk.
After you finished breakfast, did you see anyone on the way back to your room?
Yes, ma'am. I saw a black gentleman walking down the sidewalk ahead of me, maybe 100 to 150 feet. He had on short pants that went right below the knees, and a dark shirt was the best, plus he was wearing a hat with a narrow brim. We were proceeding down talking. All of a sudden, there was somebody in my wife's face and my face and said, "Give me your pocketbook." She first said, "Oh," like that, and she started to drop the pocketbook off her shoulder and her arm to give it to him.
So they looked up, the man turned and wheeled. I believe he thought the man right-handed, which makes sense because the bullet entered here. So, turn with your right hand. Okay, all right, turns. The gun is less than 18 inches from her face. He says, "Give me the purse," or "Give me the wallet." And there's some conflict about that. She starts to take the purse off. Before she can do it, he fires. She's falling back.
How close was he to you?
2.5, 3 feet.
Okay. What part of his body were you looking at?
Well, looking at his face.
But you indicated you also saw his gun?
Yes, after he told her to give him her pocketbook, he raised the pistol and shot her right in here.
And you're indicating over your nose area?
Well, it's in the bridge right there.
Okay. You're indicating on the right side, the bridge of the nose, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now... No, not the right side. I'm showing you the wrong side. It's on this side. Okay. But you're indicating the bridge area?
The bridge area, yes.
Okay. Now, the person that did this on May 7th that confronted you and your wife and shot your wife, do you see this person in the courtroom today?
Yes, ma'am.